Georgia, we're live.
Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to our workshop of September 5th, 2023. I'll be sitting in for the mayor, Lee, who is attending remotely. Councilperson Wren is also attending remotely. Paloma is excused, and our attorney, Nick Ward-Willis, will be represented by his associate, Jennifer Gray, regarding a few of the items on the agenda tonight.
And John Clark, our city planner, is with us
And
as
John
well.
Clark will be online as well. So the first item on the agenda is 6 Commerce Street, proposed rezoning. And will Jennifer be presenting this, or who's going to start the conversation, or who wants to start the conversation?
John was talking to us. John, would you be prepared to talk about it? You're on mute, John.
All right. This is an application from the property owner to the city council, so you're under an obligation to do it, but it has been vetted by me through a memo to the city council and through the planning board advisory process. And myself and the planning board seem to think it made a lot of sense. It's a very small parcel. It's in the block north of Commerce Street. So it's surrounded by CMS, Central Main Street businesses. It faces on Commerce Street, and it was included in the R1 7.5 district, primarily, as I remember it, because it was a single-family house at the time, and single-family houses are not a permitted use in the Central Main Street district. So even though it's very small, it doesn't meet the standards of a 7.5 district. It was included in that. Well, now the property owner wants to make it a commercial use, and so he's petitioned the council to change it to a CMS designation under zoning. It has been refurbished. It's a Second Empire house with 1 parking space. The potential detriments to the rezoning are that it doesn't have parking for a commercial use, or enough parking for a commercial use, but it is within walking distance of the county lot and the city hall lot, and eventually the firehouse lot. It doesn't meet the standards of a CMS district in terms of lot depth, but it doesn't meet any standards under the 7.5 residential district. So it seemed to make sense. It was in a commercial block. It was refurbished for commercial purposes, and the planning board thought there was no reason why it shouldn't be considered by the council for rezoning.
Does anybody have any thoughts on this?
So I heard that a commercial business might have already opened up in that building. Can anyone confirm that? There was a grand opening sign on the side of the building?
When you had reported that, we had the building department go over about a week later, and there were no signs. He interviewed someone who said someone was still living there, and he saw no signs that would prompt him to issue an order to remedy.
Okay.
So-
I saw a
so
grand
the-
opening sign on the side of the building.
They might have gotten a little ahead of themselves, but
Okay.
they quickly dialed it back.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't consider the property out of any compliance at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I personally don't see a problem with this, and it seems to make a lot of sense given its location, even by the simple fact that it's on Commerce Street, and it seems like it should be a commercial entity. But I think they've done a beautiful renovation job, and I think it's almost a direct connection to Main Street as well. So.
I agree. The one thing I have questions about, and John, I don't know if this is a question for you can answer, but if it is in the Central Main Street district, and let's say they wanted to open a a restaurant there or a business that had evening hours, it does face residential properties, and I'm wondering, in order to do that, would they have to go through the planning board or another permitting process, or because they're in the central Main Street, they would be allowed to do that as of right?
Yeah, they would be allowed to do it as of right if it wasn't a specially permitted use in the CMS district. Restaurants are as of right. It would run up against parking issues, I think, for a higher intensive use like that, and so the planning board might have some leverage about what couldn't pass muster on that site, but it is an as of right use. If it's in the CMS district, most commercial uses would be. It also could be a mixed use. Residences or multifamily is allowed on the upper floor, so it could be an apartment above and a business on the ground floor.
I was going to say that I did wander over there and just take a look around. Again, I saw nothing to indicate a business being open. They've redone some of the way the parking lot behind Bank Square accesses Commerce Street, which I thought was a nice add. And it probably ends up with more parking than would have been if it were just the single family the way it was. So again, I have no issues. They've done a very strong renovation of an old building, so I've got no issues.
Is this request the only path towards changing the usage of the building? Is this not something that could have gone before the zoning board? Like, what would be the normal path to accomplish these aims other than coming to the city council and changing the zoning?
The alternative, hi everyone, it's Jennifer Gray, Keen Bean. The alternative would be a use variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. Use variances have a very high standard of review. They're difficult to obtain. They'd have to show that their difficulty isn't self-created for a use variance, and they'd also have to show that they can't get a reasonable rate of return for any other use that is permitted in the zoning district in which they are located. So it is a high standard. So where it tends to potentially make sense to rezone the property. Many times you'll see a property owner come to the city council for a zoning amendment of the map rather than seek a use variance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I would add is, if I'm thinking about zoning, I look 20 years down the pike and forget this owner and forget this use. What do you imagine this space being? And it belongs as a commercial use, right? I mean, I could see a residential upstairs, but it is so close in to way too many businesses that I just don't see it making sense as a residential 20 years from now.
Yeah,
The conversion of the old church that fronts on Main Street now has an alley configuration that links to that building that goes right, sort of merges in with this property. So even more so than before, once that the Bethlehem Church becomes a commercial use, it will be more integrated with that site. And I think it makes it harder to imagine that would maintain itself as a residential use, given the commercial uses that surround it and the rear entrances to the inn next door and the church building.
What would be the next step that would be taken? Would there be a public hearing on this, or?
Well, I think,
Yes.
yeah, and we wanted to, before we drafted the local law, we wanted to just make sure the city council was okay to move forward.
Mhm.
So Jennifer, I guess at the next meeting, we could set the public hearing for a subsequent meeting?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've already done all of your required referrals to the planning board and to county planning. So the next step is to schedule a public hearing on the proposed local law.
And I guess we'll need a draft local law in order to do that as well. So we'll ask Keenan Bean to do that this week.
That's great.
I think there's already one in the packet.
Oh,
I thought I saw one.
If there is, we'll review it and make sure it's in the right format and present that to the city council for your next meeting.
And this rezoning would only affect this specific property, none to the east of it, or like there's a, well, I guess it's other businesses all to the east on that side.
Or you do have a draft local law.
Yeah.
We're all set.
So that, but this is just specific to this property?
Yes,
Yeah.
the one property.
The one property.
Okay, well, we'll get notice out in the newspaper, Ben. It's,
Okay, anything else, anybody? All right, we'll go on to our second item on the agenda, and I believe this is the Hip Lawson Studios Development Concept Plan. Have we decided to postpone this?
Jennifer, did you have any further conversations? My last information is that the developer asked for the public hearing next week to be adjourned, and that they weren't ready to talk about it tonight because they're working on a couple things.
I have not heard anything further than that, so that's the latest that I'm aware of.
So unless John or the mayor has new information, I would propose we just adjourn this conversation to the next workshop.
Okay.
Jennifer, are you able to make the next workshop? Because I have a particular question that you actually might have insight into.
What is the date of your next workshop?
It's 2 weeks from yesterday, so doing math, the 18th of September.
Why don't we do the question now while we
Okay,
have Jennifer,
yeah.
and then when Nick is back, and the developer is here, we can.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a question, and forgive me, I don't know the district very well, but I was trying to look at the copious amount of information that was provided in the packet, and this question actually came up in the planning board meeting, I think from June, and it's about looking at the Fishkill Development Creek District as a whole. And it seems to be reading it that that's something that maybe is under the planning board's purview. But I just wanted to confirm with you that when we're looking at a concept plan, we shouldn't also be thinking about not just this site along the Fishkill Creek, but all sites. And that is something that the planning board is able to take into account as they consider what might be best.
Yeah, I think that's always the case when you have an application before you, whether it's for concept plan in the Fishkill Creek Development District or a site plan that's before the planning board. You obviously you have an application for a particular piece of property, but you're also thinking about how the proposed development fits into its neighboring properties and the neighborhood in general. So, whether there's a specific regulation that speaks to that, I would have to double check the district regs and take a look at that. But I think, you're always looking at how a proposed development kind of fits into the neighborhood as a whole.
Great. And would that include, and my understanding of this particular district is it's both to repurpose the former industrial sites and to protect the creek, but that also includes sort of the making sure that the full protections for the creek are in place?
It depends. Sure, yes. The purpose of the district, as I understand it, is to kind of revitalize these old industrial sites while at the same time protecting the Fishkill Creek, as well as providing public access along the Fishkill, the Greenway Trail. As far as impacts to the creek, each individual application is going to have different impacts. So you're going to want to look at that at a case-by-case basis. One mitigation measure for protecting the creek for one project might not be applicable for another. So that's something that you're going to want to look at on a case-by-case basis, unless there's a specific reg in the code that says otherwise, that there's a blanket protection, and I don't recall there being one.
Great, thank you.
And I would just say we've had a couple calls to figure out more details about the pump station that serves the property. My team and I want to make sure that whatever infrastructure is offered to the city fully meets the current and future needs there. So we're evaluating that with them as well.
Great, Yeah, and just to name the question behind my question, so it's not a mystery, is that I think this was brought up in that meeting as well, the idea that their neighbor right to the north, the rest of Hip Lofts, is not built out. There's another property further down Fishkill Creek that's not built out. So when it comes to the seeker, which I think they already have a negative declaration, meaning no impact, I just want to kind of understand more about how that's done when they're looking at the totality of the Fishkill Creek watershed and how that's actually done. I didn't know if that falls under us as the council because it happens to go through the concept review to look at, or if that's something that the planning board feels empowered to be able to do as well. So that was kind of the question behind my question. So thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll go on to the third item on the agenda, which is the Fishkill Avenue rezoning. I think John Clark will be presenting this. We began speaking about it last week.
Yes, we introduced this last week. It came out of the discussions of housing opportunities or housing options. The fact that this district or this area is losing some of its major businesses there. It seems to appear that some of the major businesses are being phased out. The parking lots are getting emptier and emptier along the new car lots there. And the fair insurance, the guarantee at this point, although it's not totally guaranteed, that the rail line that runs along the rear side of this between the creek and the existing GB and LI districts in that area will be a rail trail in the hopefully near future. And so this area can take on a different character that would benefit from additional housing opportunities and access to the rail trail and the creek. So that's what sort of spurred this on. As we discussed at the last workshop, I put out a draft map. It seemed to get enough support in the council at that time that I was asked to draft a law. So I did that. It's still a work in progress. This is the first meeting. If you want, I can share my screen and we can sort of go through with this is the existing zoning for that area. It's a mixture of general business, highway industrial, which is the old rail right-of-way, and light industrial on the southern end. It backs up against a couple of residential districts and a heavy industrial district on the north end. And when I was asked to come up with a proposal, this is what I proposed: that we merge the GB district, the HI rail corridor, and a few of the parcels north of the old Talax site into Fishkill Avenue district, for lack of a better name, and that we use most of the design standards and the height and bulk come out of the either existing GB district or the design standards I took borrowed heavily from the linkage district. So nothing you see in this draft zoning is really new. It's consistent with what we've done with other mixed-use development zone where you might want housing above commercial, like the Central Main Street district or the linkage district. So I don't know if anybody wants to discuss this map first. Do you see anything that you don't like and are concerned about, or what's the initial reaction to the general idea of creating a Fishkill Avenue district that would be more design oriented than the current one, which has no design standards whatsoever? So it's essentially, if you meet the dimensional standards, setbacks, height, that's it. That's the only parameters for this district. There are a few things like lighting and things that are in other sections of the code, but generally speaking, yeah, it's a pretty free-for-all territory out in the general business or light industrial district.
John, my only question was, why did the zone you created not extend all the way to the town line southeast of Route 52? Obviously, there's the industrial zone northwest of 52, but why not extend it to the town line?
That could be done. It's a residential district now, and if the goal is to preserve residential uses or create residential options, then I thought that area could be expanded for residential uses. It's the unbuilt area of that RD5 is relatively, it's a historic area, and it's already has quite a few buildings on it. The little strip that is HI is essentially the rail right-of-way, so you couldn't build on that anyway. I'm concerned, generally speaking, about strip development in Beacon. I've said that in relation to, say, lower the West Main Street area, and this area as well. The idea would be is to prevent commercial strip type Route 9 South sort of development, which is what's out there now, which is low slung, parking oriented, automobile oriented type businesses with drive-throughs and gas stations and car lots and that sort of thing. But I would suggest that you try to make it as walkable and centrally orientated as possible and not string it out so it becomes more of a competitor to Main Street. I think the trends in commercial and particularly office, but also retail development is there's a lot of scaling back going on in the world right now in the United States with online purchasing and the work at home sort of ethic that's grown up after the pandemic. Office space is at a real disadvantage in terms of trying to lease up new office space or even old office space. And even retail in many places is going empty because there just isn't as much market as there was because a lot of it is going online. So I would even suggest that you might consider making this a real mixed-use district in which you could have first floor residential or upper floor residential. So it would be a mix of commercial and residential uses along this corridor rather than a string out commercial frontage the way you have on Main Street, for instance. So that's something to think about. But that's why I stopped it at a certain point, that I didn't want to keep going and make it longer and longer. I also contemplated not putting the LI parcels to the south end of this area and just leaving them light industrial so that the car wash and things like that would still have a place in the world. But it does front on Memorial Park and a residential district. So I thought, well, maybe giving some opportunities there as well, and leaving the Talex site alone. So that was my thinking.
John, I'm not that familiar with it, and you might be more familiar with it, but there was recently an approved project done in that area.
On Conklin.
Yes.
On Conklin Street. If you're familiar with it, how would you say that aligns with your vision and this draft zoning?
Well, that's allowed under this current zoning, but it's not required. So the applicant came in and decided that he could have just done a straight one-story office rehab or something to that effect. But he decided to do a mixed-use project, hired an architect who was familiar with Main Street type businesses, and they came in with a brick and fiber cement building that is similar to the types of buildings you'd see along Main Street with multiple stories. It's a 3-story frontage on the front and 2 stories in the back because it's sort of built into a hill. It's got rear parking lot. It's got street trees and landscaping. It's got an outdoor area for the tenants, a tiered, stepped up garden, if you will, with sitting areas for the tenants. I think they did a really exceptional job, and that could be used as a model for a new type development along this corridor, as opposed to just putting in a drive-through restaurant or another gas station or whatever else could be allowed under the existing law. So that was another impetus, that there is a market for that sort of building happening in the city, and why not extend it out to here, because you get more opportunities for residential development in particular.
John, what would be the impact on the plots that are sort of between Wingate and Hedgewood that are currently R175 if we were to convert them to FA as well? I assume that the houses could remain as long as they wanted to remain, but would that impact the ability, say, for those homeowners to add a garage or add to their buildings if we change the zoning underneath their land?
I don't think it would add to, there's certain uses they couldn't, certain things they couldn't do under non-conforming status. It does create complications for a non-conforming use. That's why I didn't put it in. Those are sort of set back from the street. They are more, they're connected in some cases to rear access. They don't have driveways right on 52 there. So I didn't think that they were appropriate to put in. I did think twice about the Wingate property, because that has some land that could be developed, but it could be developed under the current residential district as well. Again, its access is primarily from the rear internally rather than from off Fishkill Avenue.
So, Sean, let's try to identify a couple of these. So, there's an LI at the bottom left. That's Talix, right?
Right. This is Talix.
Yep. There's an LI on the other side of the creek. That is Central Hudson nothing, right?
I think it's like isn't it a substation there or something?
Yes.
Substation.
Yeah. And then Hedgewood is, I'm just kind of running from the bottom left to the top right. Hedgewood is the next big lot there, right?
Right.
Okay. Wingate is where the R175 number is, just above that, or is Wingate elsewhere?
No, I think that is Wingate.
Mm-hmm.
This is Wingate here. Yeah.
Where's Hedgewood then? Isn't that Hedgewood?
Hedgewood's the one that runs along the current black edge of the FA district. It runs along, has a border with 52 or Fishkill Avenue.
Yeah, although I think the Hedgewood side is that one where John has his cursor. I could be wrong.
Yes.
We should confirm where these are, because the edges of this, I think, are something we're going to be looking at. Dallas Place follows that. There's like 2 or 3 homes there. I believe that is the next lot over, and it has a couple of homes in it. And then I'm not sure what comes after that. And then there's the development on the corner of Conklin and 52, right?
Yeah, these are both single-family homes, these 3.
All right. Yeah, so, and then on the other side, I'm just trying to identify the adjacent parcels. On the other side, as you mentioned to Dan's question, the site further up past the dummy light on 52, which is in the historic overlay, the red zone, is between Front Street, right in there, that little section. I do note that the Front Street homes are all on the south side of Front Street. There are no homes, I believe, on the north side of Front Street in that strip. And so maybe that might be interesting. And then what you're saying after that is HI, right?
Right.
Both on the north and on the south side. And Dan's question about would we consider extending it to the end? So a lot of those questions, I have similar ones. And I'm thinking if the zone is fairly flexible, and so not as, not as specific as our Main Street or our Fishkill Creek, it might be beneficial to have a longer zone, kind of the full length, as long as we're not disturbing existing uses, but rather offering additional ones. If there are additional uses that we want, right? I like your idea of being flexible enough to say we might want ground floor residential. So it's a long strip. I don't think we're going to ever have a Main Street style, fully there. I think that's part of that flexibility. So if it's flexible enough, I would like to consider the possibility of maybe extending it along the edges of some of those properties that we discussed. I don't know. I'm just raising it as a conceptual question to be considered. I also, just a couple of things. I I'd like the district to be flexible enough to still allow auto-related facilities, so gas station, car wash. We don't have any other place in Beacon for them. And so I think it should be flexible enough to cover that. I think, the Conklin was great as a description of something we'd love to get there. The only issue I had with the Conklin and 52 development is there was too much parking. And I'd love to see us, kind of make that smaller and to have seen, more of that land be used either for landscape or for additional housing. Those are my only comments on that. I did have one other one, which is, it struck me that this is one we might have to alter the comprehensive plan. So I did a quick search in there for Route 52, and it is surprisingly silent in general on Route 52. I saw 3 statements in there, 2 of which we're doing. One statement was creating access to Beacon Correctional from Route 52. As you know, I'm working on that and would love to see that. That was in the comp plan, so no contradiction there. Improving the streetscape and the landscape was another comment in the comp plan, and obviously we would be doing that here, so I think that would be consistent. The only other one was maintaining the existing retail and service mix. Existing might be a word we want to pull. It's not a big one, it's just a single word, but I thought the comp plan would require a lot of change. Doesn't seem to, so I just wanted to raise those as well.
Yeah, one thing I did was that I kept almost all the area and height and dimensional standards and the use standards the same as the GB district. So we are maintaining. You still can put a gas station there. You can still put a car wash. You can still do those sorts of things. You can still do a big floor plate grocery store, for instance, if you really wanted to. There's a couple things in the draft zoning that would make it not as likely that some of that to happen. I did say that you have to set back any sort of auto-oriented parking lots or fuel pumps or drive-through windows at least 40 feet from the property frontage, and it has to be screened and landscaped so that it's, not the frontage piece, it's the secondary piece behind the building. And then I also said that it had to be 2 stories, minimum 2 stories, which is what we've done in other, the form-based code, the LI, the linkage and the CMS district.
Hey, John, do you mind if I interrupt you for a second? Because you're touching on a lot of points, and
Sure.
There's a couple in there that I want to have a conversation about. I think the mayor made a lot of really good points about the business mix and the usage mix. I like the idea of preserving auto usage on Route 52. However, with regards to gas stations, I feel Beacon is pretty well supported by the 4 or 5 gas stations that we have, and the percentage of vehicles that are internal combustion engine is only going to go down with time. So I don't see the need to include zoning for additional gas stations on the strip, let alone the entire city of Beacon. We seem pretty well supported by the gas stations that we have.
Well, the ones on Main Street are non-conforming. Those are not permitted by the new zoning there. So they could be phased out over time, and then this area would be the only place other than a couple GB districts. Now, you do have gas stations just beyond the border in the town, but
Right, but the percentage of vehicles that are internal combustion engine is only going to go down from here. I mean, most vehicle manufacturers are talking about phasing out internal combustion engine by 2035.
Right.
I think we're.
But they may turn into charging stations, but that's to be determined in the future. We don't know.
Right, I would assume that the market would sort that out. I am aware that our Main Street zoning doesn't permit gas stations, and so I'm expecting those uses to sell out to something far more valuable, because the square footage, pricing of Main Street is very high now. So I do think we're going to need something somewhere where it's permitted in the city.
There are places where the gas pumps are put behind the convenience store or the store that goes with the gas station. And they work fine as long as they're not completely hidden and it's identified as a gas station. People figure it out. And, this isn't a high drive-by sort of corridor where you get a lot of people who don't know where they're going in this area in particular. But I left gas stations and car washes and drive-throughs in this area. You could take them out. They're probably less likely to be put in if the proposed zoning goes through, because they would be required to do a 2-story building and put the pumps in the back or the drive-through window in the back, which isn't as convenient for the standard Burger King or Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, I think this zone we'd be unlikely to get a gas station as a standalone use of a new building. That just seems uneconomic. I had a question on the drive-through. So there's like a Dunkin' Donuts on Route 90, a little north of Beacon. They've got parking in the front. We were saying if they wanted to do a Dunkin' Donuts with a drive-through, they'd have to bring the building up to the front. They'd have to put the drive-through component in the back. They'd have to put the parking in the back, and they'd have to put a second story on it.
That's the way it's drawn up now, because I sort of based it on the linkage district the only changes, as I remember, I made in this district from the linkage district, there was some minor things, like instead of the first 50 feet has to be commercial in the CMS district or the linkage, and this one I made 75, so you could have bigger stores there, or more likely to have bigger stores. But generally speaking, I borrowed from the linkage district design standards. So what you have in place there, and the sort of, the sort of things you'd have on West Main Street or on Central Main Street would be the types of buildings you would envision happening here, with some existing non-conforming uses and, the possibility of having a drive-through window or even a gas station with fuel pumps that would be to the side or to the rear of the building.
Hey, John, I saw that you had the minimum of 2 floors, which I like, but I didn't see a maximum number of floors proposed. Did I miss that in your proposal?
Let's look and see.
The reason I ask, and you know what? I think when I was reviewing the packet, I don't think the dimensional tables were there yet, so maybe I should check
Right.
that.
So I kept it pretty much the same as the GB district, which has a 35-foot height limit and no story. So in theory, you could put a 3-story building there, or a 2.5-story building. Mm-hmm. The only changes I made were I put in a 15% minimum landscaped area, where they don't have any now. As you can tell, it's paved over almost entirely there, but they would have to have at least 15%, which is what's required in the linkage district. And I took away the per unit minimum lot size per unit. Right now, the GB district has 1,500 square feet per unit, but I think it always works best if you allow the whatever to happen within the building envelope that you can provide. Up to a 3-story building, up to a certain amount of landscaping and setbacks and parking if it's still required. So it gives maximum flexibility for housing in this area.
Yeah, and the reason I was raising that is because that stretch of Route 52 actually has some really spectacular views of the mountain. And yes. If we put a lot of tall buildings in there, I mean, the way that I'm reading the zoning proposal here is that we could put a whole bunch of 344 main streets along Route 52, and it would conform as long as we had shutters on the windows. So I'm a little cautious about the height. And I don't, I think we would upset a lot of people on the north side of the street by taking away their views.
I had a similar question, actually related to the hip lofts as well, because they don't have any views right now, and I'm wondering, because we do have that view shed law, if this is an area we also concurrently want to take a look at and think about, are there any particular view sheds we do want to protect, which means that we don't have to, my understanding of view shed law is that this could be a version of this, what John just described, with 35 feet, 3 stories, but then the view shed would layer over that, so for those particular lots that they're impacting that view shed, they would have different requirements.
The thing is that whole thing is a view shed. And if you start putting in stretches where the buildings can be tall and then put in a few that are short just because that one area is a view shed, you've effectively cut off the view shed. It's just a view shed with texture, or it's a skyline with texture.
Yeah, I wanted to go look around. You'd still have the view shed by the rail trail because they'd be behind the buildings. But yes, for those who live or walk along the other side.
Yeah, we should go down there and go for a walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we were discussing months ago the potential view corridors, view locations that would be designated. There was one in this area, and that was at the base of State Street, as I remember, because you get a particularly spectacular view there because there's no car dealers or car washes or anything in front of you. It's the southern end of the Groveville site, and you get a really broad panorama there. So you can certainly designate views. I refer to that in the draft zoning, that view corridors and even access corridors can be negotiated with the developers as part of the site plan process.
Yeah, Melanie, I do want to take a walk, Dan, on that section, because I just want to get a sense of that. I'll also go look up where we had identified view sheds. My 2 cents, and this is all conceptual thinking, it's like, well, we don't have residential, running right up against a tall building like we do on Main Street, which is a reason to kind of limit height. This might be an area where, especially if you want housing, going to a 4-story is probably quite economic for a builder because you still can do a stick building, don't have to do more than that. We might be able to, get some additional affordable as a result. And I think if we limited it to certain stretches, like, we identified the view shed, we identified where there were single-family homes abutting, and we limited it to those. I might be willing to see it go higher. That's my 2 cents.
John, this is relative to what Dan was talking about earlier as to why we didn't run the zoning all the way to the line of the town line. So the way it's currently drafted, those properties in the H1 districts, like Kempreen, the tractor company, industrial arts, there would be nothing in this that would encourage any kind of development on the areas closer to the to 52. Is that correct?
Yes, although it's been sort of a running policy that we want to preserve the opportunity for job creation type uses in the industrial zones. The city has very few industrial zones.
I guess I'm not. I'm not.
So that's part of the reason I didn't do that. I mean, the industrial arts and the tractor sales place also have topographical types of issues. Kempreen has a really nice buildable front yard that would be useful for light industrial, but if there's no concern that light industrial is going to be crowded out of the city, then at least that parcel could be included in this district, because that's a very buildable portion of the north side of 52.
Do you mean the front yards, George?
Yeah, basically the front yards. And I was wondering, is there a way to keep both? Is there some happy medium where, and I'm not sure, and this might be a stupid question, but does zoning lines always have to be the same lines as property lines, or can a property be split in two? In two different
Yes,
zones
it can be.
property?
It's generally, you don't like to split parcels, but there's no prohibition against it. Just policy-wise, Very few parcels are split in the city. That one in Highland Place caused quite the controversy because it was a split parcel, if you remember. So there are a few remnant ones, but generally speaking, when the laws are done, it's much cleaner to keep parcel by parcel within the zoning district. The other thing is that in the HI district, you're not allowed residential. LI, you are. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to see if there's an opportunity to have, to have our cake and eat it too, and keep, keep the industry, keep the job potential, as well as create some affordable housing, or, even just a streetscape, a pleasant streetscape that you drive past and it's not just an empty lot or a parking lot.
I like the idea, George. I was thinking the same thing of, those front yards could be some nice buildings and residential buildings, and then they could have industrial in the back.
Yeah.
And it would look nicer.
Yeah, so I think if we could encourage that kind of development through our zoning, it's an opportunity for us.
Yeah, I had sort of the same view, thinking where both comments were. So at the front of those lots, if it had greater opportunity in terms of zoning to develop, it might encourage a development. It might still be industrial. I think we should allow it. But if it's 2 stories, it could be some commercial space as well as, some kind of a business space. So it might encourage it.
I think the answer to this question might come from our steep slopes law, actually. Because I think John mentioned the grade in that area. I think it's kind of a steep drop, so maybe we should look at that as an important data point.
Yeah, I think it'd be difficult to build on the industrial arts property in particular, but also the Tractor Supply place or whatever it is.
I think it's the Kemprine lot that doesn't have quite that steepness. You're right, the Industrial Arts Brewing does. Here, I don't recall. We'd have to go look.
And in terms of the rail trail views, when you're down on the rail trail, you're really too low because the grade just kind of keeps going, Molly, to see that view.
Oh, thanks, Ren. In our permitted uses, I'm wondering about small-scale manufacturing, like coffee roasting. Is that allowed in the linkage district and then also in this code here? I couldn't tell. It doesn't seem to fall neatly under retail, so I didn't know what our current, or if that has to sort of be in an industrial setting or non-conforming.
Let's take a look.
I see there's bar, brew pub, microbrewery, micro distillery. There's coffee house. I'm also thinking of things like bottling services or things that are not necessarily as intense as, what Kemprine might do, but things that we might want to. Thinking of this as a flexible district, kind of other businesses that we might want to encourage in this area. And if we're going to be okay with auto services, other kinds of small scale or light touch manufacturing that we might also be okay with in this space.
Certainly food preparation business is permitted under this draft table. Under wholesale storage is it permitted, workshop is permitted, industrial manufacture is not.
So, John, following Molly's comment, if we were to look at the LI permitted uses, there'd be a couple more you might add. Would that kind of do the trick?
Certainly, industrial manufacturing is so far the only one I spot that would be needed to be that would make a difference.
Yeah.
All the rest seem to be consistent.
Well, the one that I wanted to ask about, so under healthcare, we have hospital or nursing home, no, and animal care facility under a special permit, but what about doctor's offices or a storefront pediatrician or any kind of doctor, because we have next to no doctors at Beacon.
Well, that would be under office up here, and it would be permitted.
So it would just be office? That would just
Yes.
be covered by office? Okay.
Yeah. So you could switch the, allow industrial or manufacturing use. That would be the only other thing that I made a change is I put, parking structure as a possibility in that district. Not that I think it's gonna be likely, but, it'd be more likely out there than it would be if you build out that district. That parking might get to be a crunch and you need to put in some central facility in the long run, or some private mixed-use building might want to put in a second-level parking or something to, if they had enough residential use or whatever. So I allowed that by special permit. But otherwise, it's consistent with the GB district, and it is relatively consistent with the LI district. Except for that one change, which I could easily make industrial use or manufacturing use.
I'd be okay going in that direction. It would also be a reason to consider extending the zone into the Talix area. And maybe make it easier to extend into the Kent Green space a little bit further up 52.
Yeah.
The other one, is there still a veterinary facility on 52, or is that gone?
I believe it's still there.
So under this zoning, it would be a non-conforming use?
That'd be a special permit use.
I think this should just be a permitted use. I don't.
Now, the reason it's a special permitted use is because of the possibility of kennels and how that might affect neighboring residential properties. That's why it's considered a special permit use. I'm trying to find it in the use
Oh, I mean,
table.
we
I
have
can't find it.
You've got a
not here.
side yard setback of 20 feet. So there would be 40 feet between every building, right?
There could be, yes.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding the dimensions table, but here we have the side, we have 20 feet on the side on both sides of every building, which puts 40 feet between every building, right?
Yes, that's the way the GB district is. If you want to change that, that'd be great.
40 feet might be enough to allow for some kennels, and I think there's regulations about noise and odor already. We have a veterinary on Main Street with kennels in the back. I know my pets were in them. I haven't heard any complaints about that.
Yeah. Well, in this case, the reason it's put in there is because of the kennels, and a special permit by the planning board is not an onerous process. It's part of, can be done in conjunction with site plan. It's when the special permit is by the city council that it turns into a significant delay in going back and forth between the two boards. But you could make it a permitted use if you want.
Yeah, I guess the issue becomes if the kennels are outdoors as opposed to indoors. I get it. I hadn't thought about that. I'm okay either way.
John, can you talk a little bit about parking to the side of a building and just how that might play out? I'm trying to avoid having large parking lots, except where we designate one to say this is where people who are accessing that area in general can park, but making sure we don't have a lot of businesses that have large side parking lots. But I'm just not quite understanding. I think having you talk through how that might play out in practice would be helpful, just to see how it's currently and what you've proposed.
The way it works in the Linkage District and the CMS District, actually, although we don't have a lot of front yard parking lots or side yard parking lots, there are a few. The bank, there, I think it's the Citizens Bank. No, it's not the Citizens Bank. What is it? The Key Bank. Anyway, the way the zoning is set up under those two districts, and I put it in this one as well, is that you're encouraged to have parking towards the rear, behind the building, but you can't have it in the side as long as it's 40 feet back from the property line and is screened. So it has a low wall or a landscaping hedge or some method so the parking lot is set back enough And then presumably 40 feet allows enough for another building to fill in over time in front of that parking lot. So that's the theory behind it. Some lots are not deep enough to have rear parking, so you almost have to put it in the side. And this allows that to happen, but it allows it to be built out over time in front of that parking lot and to have screening in the meantime.
Thank you.
This might be an unpopular opinion, but when I was looking at the setbacks for this zone, I actually thought we were probably putting in a little too much space. I was interested in seeing, for example, the front yard setback to be more akin to the CMS, like 0 to 10, to get the buildings as far away from the creek as possible. And even the 20-foot side, the setbacks on the sides seems a little much as well. That means that you're always going to have 40 feet between every building, which, that you could fit a whole other building for Main Street in that space. I don't know, I guess I was wondering what your thinking was, John, with regards to these setbacks, and how you chose them, the front and the side setbacks.
Now, I thought about it, and I decided for this first run that I would keep it the same as the GB district, just so there was, some differential between Central Main Street and this. But I would be perfectly happy, especially the side yard setback, I think is more than necessary. The 25-foot, maybe not, because that's going to be backed up against the rail trail and the residential properties behind. And you could go shorter on the front too. I envisioned it as having a lot of landscaping in that 15-foot space rather than, this being, but if you think long-term, it could end up being a district that is comparable to Main Street in some ways. As it's configured, there's only a sidewalk on one side of the street. I think it would be nice if the sidewalk was on both sides of the street, but I don't know if there's money in the budget to pay for that.
Yeah, I would head in the same direction as Dan on this one, because if I'm, kind of thinking ahead, and we're successful, we're kind of discouraging density when we might want to encourage. So if we adjust the setbacks to be shorter, maybe we do the same with GB just to make them consistent, and that might be an approach that works.
Well, there'll be 3 remnant GB districts left if you rezone this one into something else. There's the corner on South Street in Walcott, there's the corner of Howland in Walcott, and there's the Leonard Street area, the Roundhouse, that sort of area. Those are and then there's where the silos are. So there's a few general business left, but none of them are, likely to, I think the silos property, for instance, could be incorporated into the Central Main Street district or have that sort of, because that's a very narrow property. It's going to be hard to do anything with any significant setbacks there, for instance. But like I said, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible on this first pass, so as not to upset anybody that we're making drastic changes. It's essentially the same GB district, except that we have better design standards for both architecture, landscaping, walkability, sustainability, that sort of things. But if you want to go less, I think it's perfectly appropriate. I think 10 foot on the side and 10 foot in the front would be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I looked at your GBs. Obviously, it's the two business strips along Wolcott, and then the silos on Tyranda, and then in front of the Roundhouse. I would think we'd be okay easing up those setbacks just to make them similar. I like the idea of shortening the setbacks in this Route 52, and if to be consistent, those are the only 4 left, I'd be okay there too. I don't think it would affect us in any significant way. And shortening the setbacks might be a good thing in some of those areas.
So 10 and 10 is okay, or you want to go less?
I don't know, others?
The only thing that I'll say about the Fishkill one is that, and John, you actually explicitly included this on the southeast side, making sure that people have access to the rail trail, which I guess would necessitate at least some pathways between the structures. So I don't know if that needs to be explicitly written into these setbacks, but that would be the only thing there. But aside from that, I'm fine to go as close, could be 10 feet, could even be 0 feet in some cases. So it's more about the access to the rail trail that I'd want to have in several pockets along that stretch.
And if we could grab it back on the back end, so, we do get noise complaints from neighbors that are living around Tompkins Terrace area about the sounds that come from the car dealerships. So looking forward, whatever could be in that FA district, if we could get 10 more feet on the rear end of those properties, it would make those neighbors there happy. Also on the Fishkill Creek district side, just being, that much farther away from the creek.
Yeah, I left the 25 feet for that reason as the rear yard setback, but that's for the building. And then I also put in the zoning that you had to have a minimum 8 feet between any parking lot that's landscaped with a fence, if it fronts on either a residential property or the rail trail, so that there would be a landscape buffer of at least 8 feet. I did put in a thing in one of the design standards. It says site development plans adjacent to the rail trail right-of-way in Fishkill Creek shall be sensitive to the property's relationship with these important public features, shall be developed in such a way as to protect any city-designated public views, and may be required to establish a view or access corridor from the public sidewalks through the development to the rail right-of-way. So that gives the planning board some ammunition.
And are the lots deep enough for all of these kind of combined, or are there sections that the lots would be pretty shallow?
The lots are pretty shallow. I mean, they're larger lots than, say, on Main Street, but they're not deep. Where do you put the parking? If you put it behind and then it's up against the residential or up against the rail trail. But if you put it in the front, then, you'd ruin the whole aesthetic of the district. So that's why I left the side yard possibility in, with a mandatory setback of 40 feet at minimum, and put in that mandatory 8-foot landscape buffer. So at least there's something where you can put in trees and high hedges or a fence or something that interrupts the view from the rear lots, if there is going to be parking to the rear. But I can imagine that a lot of people, if they're building between a sidewalk and the rail trail, would want to have rear patios overlooking the rail trail and the creek with the mountain view if they can get it.
Yeah, we might want to leave some flexibility for the planning board to kind of do site planning work, because on narrow lots, maybe side parking is the only option. And putting, a 40-foot restriction as well might make it, unbuildable. I understand where you're going, but we might want to leave some flexibility and give the planning board some kind of guidance and then let them sort.
I think one thing that is probably something we should talk about with regards to this is the size of the footprint of the buildings. So, for example, if I had maybe one of the Healy Brothers properties, which are quite long, my reading of what we have here in front of us now is that you could create a building that runs all the way, that entire length of that entire property, as long as you just had 10 feet on each side. And so That seems a little, that would scare me a little. Those would be, I don't think that would be very nice. And so I'm wondering if we should put in here a maximum footprint, so that there, if you had a property like, a long property, that you end up putting multiple buildings in there instead of one really long building. I really am not a fan of these long buildings where they just kind of put up different types of siding every 20 feet to trick you into thinking that it's a different building. I think it's distasteful, and I don't think it looks good in Beacon. It's more suited for Westchester County or Connecticut. I just don't think that we should have buildings that long. So what do you think of that, John?
I think that's a good point, and I have no problem putting in a 120 or 150 foot maximum building length. I think you have to be a little careful about footprint because, say if a grocery store wanted to go in there, and that's something that I think you shouldn't preclude, you might want to have a big footprint, but it wouldn't, the frontage could be limited to 150 feet or some length so that you don't get these really, like you said, long buildings with narrow jogs to them.
So, sir, again, could we, I think we'd all agree to Dan's comment. Could we put that in the design standards?
Yes.
And I hear you right, there was an A&P, on 52 at one point. And if that happened to be, too long, that's not a good thing. We probably want to encourage that. But yeah, we don't want it to be a half a mile long, right?
Yes, yeah, so how about 150 feet to start as a discussion point?
Yeah, we can work it. We'll get some input from that if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to go down there before we make any final decisions about this stuff.
Sure.
But that was just a concern of mine, was the building sizes.
A lot of the Healy properties actually already split up into parcels, I discovered the other day, which was interesting to see.
What was that?
A lot of the Healy property is actually individual parcels. Most of it is not one big stretch in terms of how it is on parcel access. So,
But one of the, like one dealership building and its adjacent lot is a single lot, right?
Yeah, there's one big long one here, but this side of the road is cut up into individual parcels.
Yeah.
Chris, I have a question for you as we talk about this. Gailey, do you have any insight about the water and wastewater infrastructure kind of serving these now? If we were to put in buildings and more different types of uses, would that be something that you want to check with our department heads and see if there's any concerns around that?
We've talked about that issue because we're upgrading sewer in Fishkill Avenue now and trying to anticipate that things may grow further.
Mm-hmm.
I would need to have more conversation with Ed. I don't anticipate that there's enough room out there really to build out so much that we couldn't deal with it, and we would be upgrading our pipes anyway. Like we did on Hannah Lane and that part of Fishkill Avenue where we replaced it. Water, I think we're fine. It's wastewater would be the one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can check with Ed, see if he
Okay.
has any concern.
Yeah, sorry, it's just to know that we might pass this and be all excited and then realize that we have, an expensive infrastructure project ahead of us, which is not a reason not to do it, just a reason to know what's ahead of us, so.
Because most of the wastewater there in Groveville goes across the creek, so it doesn't even come down the pipe in Fishkill Avenue.
Oh, right, because there's that facility right there, yeah.
One thing that I am suggesting an additional change when I read it over again today, in the building height, it has a minimum 2 stories with upper floors built in a manner that allows actual occupancy rather than sort of a fake second story. Doesn't require that you actually rent it out, but you have to have something that actually is physically a 2-story building. But we ran into this in one case on Main Street where they wanted to put an accessory building to the back or an accessory secondary wing, 1 story, and it wasn't allowed in the code because they had this minimum 2-story and it applied all over the building. So I would say you could have a one-story accessory building to the rear of the principal building, or a one-story secondary addition setback at least 50 feet from the principal building facade. So that, say you had a grocery store that wanted to go in, and they could put a two-story frontage on it, with their offices or housing even above in the front, but in the back they wanted to have, a one-story building for the grocery store. And this would allow that to happen. So if you mandate the two-story, they can't put a maintenance shed out back, for instance. So that's one change that I suggested.
Maybe there's a way we can limit that. I kind of want to get everything as far away from the creek as possible. Maybe we can look at that later.
John, is there a reason that green roofs, top floor garden terraces, and/or rooftop solar panels should not be required? Are there kinds of businesses or buildings where that would actually discourage the kind of development we want to see?
I think in previous years, yes, because there wasn't enough track record and people who were familiar with how to do green rooms and things like that. But nowadays, we've been, at the planning board, have been convincing people to put in either solar panels or green roofs in many cases. And if they're not willing to do it, we get them to at least paint the building top white so it reflects heat. Other communities, cities have required it. You have the option of doing that. I don't think it's out of the realm of reality that you would say you have to do one of these options. You have to do a green roof. You have to do a rooftop terrace, rooftop solar panels.
I hear from
they
constituents
complain about
this a
that
lot.
because they say the solar panels are not cost efficient, and there's membrane issues and leak issues and extra cost of doing green roofs. But I think the technology has caught up to that, and you just have to hire somebody who knows what they're doing.
But John, if you're using an existing building, aren't load issues also relevant?
Yes.
So
No, this would be for new
the
construction,
structure
I would
may
say.
not be able to hold that weight without, a lot of change. So
Right.
you might want to differentiate between new structure and reuse of an old structure.
Yeah, the weight of the soil and water is a lot on the roof.
Yeah, similarly with the solar, so we couldn't do it on the existing part of the firehouse, but we've prepared the new part for solar.
Yeah,
So you-
no, I would say that if you're going to mandate it, it has to be for new buildings only, because it has to be planned in from the get-go.
I just wanted to say that it's a question that I get from people a lot, actually, is why don't we require green roofs in Beacon? I don't have a good answer for it, but usually the answer is development cost. But maybe this is a place where we can try it out. Maybe this is a zone where we could put it in the zoning, see how it works, and if it doesn't create a problem, then maybe it's something that we could expand later on to other districts.
Yeah, the other thing is that it mandates a flat roof. And, on some districts, certainly in, say, the Linkage district, there's not a lot of flat roofs. There's pitched roofs in some cases. And so when you have a pitched roof, you can't really have a green roof you can have solar panels, but if their orientation is right. So, but, if you have a 35-foot height limit and you're encouraged mixed use, you're going to get a lot of flat roofs, because that's how you can get 3 stories in there without having to go to a pitched roof.
I don't know if this needs to be discussed now, but in visiting other towns, rail trails, and this might be something that Chris could advise on as well, or maybe already has, I noticed that there is limited access to the rail trails. I've been to the Wallkill Creek and the Ashokan Rail Trail and the Dutchess County Rail Trail. Is there anything we should address? And this is coming to mind as we're talking about access to the rail trail between parcels. Is there anything we can do in the zoning to get the kind of access that we want in terms of could there be too much access to the rail trail? I don't know. I'm just thinking this through.
Yeah, well, there's certainly access already in the Front Street area. Although those are private roads, they in theory could object, but generally speaking, there's sidewalks there, people walk down, and there's Greenway Trail frontages along the Groveville properties. I did put that provision in that, which I read earlier, that the planning board may require view corridor or access corridor from public sidewalks through the development to the rail trail right of way. Legally, it's a little tricky, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen, read the court cases in which mandating public access through a private property is the Supreme Court does not necessarily look at that favorably. And there's been case studies where you can get in trouble about doing that, mandating private access. But I put it in may be required because you can take advantage where you have a willing applicant based on the use, if it's a restaurant type use or some other use that accesses the rail trail or takes advantage of the rail trail, they might want to have a public access through to get more business, make their parcel into a corner parcel pedestrian, in terms of pedestrian wise access. There's access in the central portion of this FA district where it's, the rail right of way goes right up against the street right of way. So you have chance for access there. So I think you'll have opportunities. You don't need it on every parcel. The best place would be, opposite a street, so people from the residential neighborhood could walk down State Street and continue straight down to the rail trail, for instance, or along Conklin Street or something like that. So it creates an actual pathway from an existing street sidewalk. So I think those things can be negotiated, but I'm a little leery put them in as the planning board may mandate that you give up some of your private property for public access, because I know you might lose that in a court.
And as we do the rail trail planning, they will look at access points and trailheads.
Yes.
You want it to have both local access points for people that are walking and live in the area. As you get further out into the Fishkills and East Fishkill, they're going to need trailheads more than we do. I think most of our user base is going to be coming out of local neighborhoods and then probably from the waterfront where people would park in the weekend. But we'll be looking at that as a design issue.
To your point about access to bikes and not access to the rail trail, I'm looking at, you have something about a minimum 15% of the lot shall be landscaped, but it could be reduced to 5% if the landscape area is accessible to the public. I wonder if that is also an opportunity to say, or if you provide access to the rail trail, like something about some trade-off with the developer, so we're not requiring it, but it is a perk, a potential perk for the developer to be able to give that access, if for some reason landscaping provides other challenges, or if they just prefer it. I don't have the exact percentages.
It's a good idea. I can look through the whole section and come up with some incentives to provide that. Like on Main Street, you allow a fourth story if you have, public access benefit. You could do something like that. That's the typical way, is you add more development potential on the site. But landscaping would be one way to do it too. It's just you don't want to. You only required 15%. But on Main Street, some people have had a hard time making the 10% landscape area, because small lots, they want to build, zero front, zero side setbacks. They want to take advantage of every square foot. So that it might work.
John, is this something where you've already have a plan or thought about bringing this to the planning board for them to review as well? I'm thinking particularly about the design standards, because I have questions, but not a lot of knowledge in this area.
Yeah, I could certainly, if you want, I could, obviously when you actually propose a law, it has to go to the planning board for their recommendation, but I could do more of an informal review. We have a half-hour work session before every meeting, and they're always looking for topics. I could bring this up as, what do you think, early on in the process, and get some reaction at the meeting, maybe even this month.
Yeah, I'm particularly, I'll just sort of name my interest that I'm curious both from the planning board and from the community at large when this goes to public or they choose to share their thoughts, that I know there's some stuff in there about, it seems to both wanting to be flexible. We've talked about the uses and the architecture as well, seems to want to be flexible. And there's also such things as like requirement for a top floor cornice feature, which in my mind means that you're leaning towards the type of buildings we have along Main Street. And I'm just curious, there might be other options and other opportunity to build more variation along this new corridor, but wanting to kind of get the planning board's much more professional and experienced opinion about that as well, about do we want to, what is it to maintain the character of Beacon and potentially offer some other opportunities to build other kinds of buildings and see if there's enough interest in that.
Yeah, the design standards are relatively flexible, and remarkably so. They've been used in some different ways, like say 248 Tyranda. When they came across that cornice, all they did was put a simple horizontal band at the very top of the brick. Other people had just tapered out the brick, a half a brick width. That's meets the standard of a cornice feature. So you don't have to do a elaborate bracketed cornice. Some people choose to do that, but other ones have actually done relatively. You'll see in particular at 2 Cross Street that that building has some very contemporary types of architecture details. So it does allow flexibility, even though it has certain standards. The architectural standards are pretty pliable. It's mainly the feedback we get from the public and from the planning board members who tend to want more traditional buildings, brick as opposed to more modern materials and that sort of thing. And it's because, at least in the Central Main Street district, you're up against, close by historic buildings, and you don't want to be really out of character. Whereas out here, there's no historic buildings on this corridor, or maybe one that you could think of. I think they would be more open to more modern types of architecture, but still have within those design standards enough flexibility to make it work. But I could run that by them. They're familiar with these design standards because they've used on them a bunch of buildings. So if they have any problems, I'll bring that up as an issue that they should think about.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to point out while we're redoing the tables, there's a couple corrections that when tables were done were either missed or mistranslated by E-code, which I think is more the case. But so for instance, on the dimensional tables, these footnotes don't apply, so I crossed those out. This is section 12I, but they made it 12.1, so it looks like section 121, so I've separated that out. And what was the other one? They left out the bottom end of this sentence from what was previously in there. So those changes I'm doing, as well as adding an FA row here of new types of uses. And in the use table, there was a couple mistakes as well. We didn't include apartments. We say multifamily, but sometimes the code refers to that as apartments, and sometimes multifamily is meant to apply to both, so I included that here. And the other one, which was the historic district overlay, for some reason, the special permit was still under city council authority rather than planning board. And that was changed in the text of the law, and it didn't get translated into the table, so I've changed that. So if you see those other changes, they're just corrections to E-code conflicts with what was intended when we redid the text back in 2020 or whatever it was.
Lee, you brought up questions related to the comprehensive plan. Do you see there needing to be a next step just to confirm if we would have to do anything with the comprehensive plan before considering this further?
So I defer to John and Jennifer on that. But it didn't look dramatically, different.
Yeah, there were two places, there were 4 references I found that were, at least should take a second look. 2 of them which I think should be changed, even though general business uses would still be allowed here. One, whereas it said that residential development should be focused on the central Main Street, Fishkill Creek, and linkage district down to the train station, as opposed to outlying districts such as the GB district. So if you're going to actually allow more development potential, mixed-use development potential, that sentence probably should be updated. And then there was another one where it said the GB district, there were no changes recommended in the code or in the plan. And, you could just add except for, additional housing, landscaping, and streetscape sorts of issues or something like that. So I think that the changes would be minor, but there was at least 2 places I thought that they would be questionable, and I pointed them out to the attorneys, and they could take a look and see what they think.
Yeah, it's definitely worth looking at because, obviously with every zoning law that you adopt, it's required to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So you want to make sure that you are being consistent. And if there are tweaks that need to be made, as the comprehensive plan is kind of a living, breathing document. So the needs of the community are going to change over time. And you want to make sure that you're adapting to that. So, John, I appreciate you pointing those 2 things out, and we'll take a look at them.
Okay.
Continue on. Okay. I think that was a good beginning of a discussion. I look forward to it continuing on. Hopefully we'll get it done before December.
Yeah, well, I do see all those sites are listed for sale, or a number of them are, so, yeah, ideally if we do want to do something differently before they get sold and start to be developed.
Yeah, no, I think
have
this
a-
is-
And there are prospective buyers already coming and asking what's allowed there.
Mhm.
So Bruce has advised them that right now, drive-throughs might not be the best idea because the impact on the neighborhoods behind there. But I would just say, the clock is ticking.
Right, we don't have.
It's
Yeah.
also making me think that the Fishkill Creek and wetlands protections that we discussed, that overlay that we discussed maybe 8 or 9 months ago, maybe something we should bring back up again. What we can do to protect the creek from development.
No, it's a great opportunity, and I think, when we're elected, we kind of, part of our responsibility is to imagine the city 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Yeah.
And this is might be the last opportunity to really envision this area.
I think it's very exciting, and we need to, take our steps. I know that there's some urgency because, things are becoming available. But I think if we let them know what we're thinking about, I actually think that potential buyers would be more interested with the zoning. So I think we're going to be pretty aligned. That, and if we manage the access into Beacon Correctional, it actually opens up some opportunities for additional, residential or other things in that direction that could spill out into this area, which would support a commercial space. So I think it's very exciting. It's probably the most kind of forward-looking area we've had to consider for a while, and it's in some respects shocking that we're so far along that we can think about it. And I think it's a lot of these ideas make a lot of sense. So it's very exciting.
Okay, on to even more exciting things. We have 2 appointments to the Tree Advisory Committee, one for Andrew Bell and one for Ethan Scooches.
Yeah, I'm going to let Ben do this.
Okay.
Ben, are you with us?
I am. Yeah. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I won't belabor too much of the written materials that have been provided to the Council and to the public, but we're bringing 2 candidates forward that we believe have pretty strong backgrounds that would be a good fit for the committee, would bring the committee up to full membership. We did have 1 member step down, and we have 1 vacancy already, so we have 2 openings. The first of the 2 members we're bringing to you tonight is Andrew, and as my memorandum will show, he's very involved in volunteering already, very involved in environmentally related volunteer opportunities, including but not limited to the Greenway Trail Committee. He co-founded the Green Beacon Coalition and has been a volunteer for the Mohonk Preserve for past 7 years. He's also was on the Main Street Access Committee as a co-chair, and he currently works for the New York City DEC. The second member we're bringing to you tonight has a very exciting resume, including working as an arborist, which the code does require having an arborist on the Tree Advisory Committee. And he has a number of great educational experiences, including a bachelor's in environmental studies from Vassar, and currently working as a fellow for conservation. So we thought that they would add some very valuable skills to the committee and help bolster the ranks and keep it active. Both members get the thumbs up from the current chair, Pete Bailey, and Mark Price, our recreation director. So hopefully these materials are sufficient for you to consider. If you need anything else, I'm happy to try and find out more information.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Anyone have any discussion regarding these 2?
No, just to echo what Ben shared, they seem to both bring lots of great skills and experience to the tree committee.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, number 6 on our agenda is the Beacon Pool Fiberglass Rehabilitation Project bid results. Chris?
Yes. So we last fiberglassed our pool at the settlement camp back in the late 1990s. We realized this year that the firm that had done that, the person who had led the fiberglassing was retiring next year, and we realized we need to do this pretty quickly. So we didn't, between when we did the capital program and now, Mark has figured out this is our one window to have this one firm come back. Because of the amount of the cost, we had to go out to bid, and the good thing is we had 3 bids come back, so we have some alternative people for the future. The low bidder was the one that is going to retire, and that's Blue Water Pools. So their base bid is $225,000. What we'd like to do is bring you a budget amendment with a couple other budget amendments in a few weeks. Susan believes we can fund this out of the fund balance, and that way we have the pool set for the next decades. Mark is also looking at whether or not before we do this that we can install some stairs into the pool to help modify that for people with access issues who can't step up or climb the ladder. So we'll be looking at those, and we'd like to do a resolution next week awarding this bid to Blue Water Pools.
Okay.
Is this related to the issue that we had a high schooler bring up in the budget process from last fall, who mentioned that she worked at the pool and
Yeah.
she'd noticed some
Yeah.
issues there?
I mean, it's an old pool, and we've gotten a lot of good years out of it. And it's kind of, we've been fortunate to get the length of use out of the last fiberglassing that we did, but it's at the end now.
Mhm.
And we wanted to have somebody that we knew could do this well, do it before they don't, are no longer available to us.
And it remained dormant for many years, too, right?
Yes.
Not used at all, right, the pool? Not
Yeah, I
even
think
filled,
in
I think.
between when the settlement camp had it and the city took it.
Yeah, a number of years it was closed.
I know one of the reasons that we have this, this kind of online system as opposed to just the walk-up and swim system is because of the limited number of people that can be in the pool at once. And I don't want to open up a huge can of worms, but I'd love to know what it would take to have a second pool beside it or to double the size of the pool. If there's anything that we could do to, I don't know, it was very nice those few years where people could just walk up and, pay at the door and go swimming and have a picnic and stuff. And
Well,
I've heard a lot of.
I think there's two issues. One is the system that's used for people to do it. There are people that are not happy with the new system, and that's something that should be discussed when we do our budget with Mark Price, because we're looking at a number of variables we can turn in terms of better funding the pool hours, better paying the lifeguards so we have a longer season. The system that we have came out of COVID, but it also had fixed a problem where you get your kids in the car and you take them to settlement camp and it's full, and you sit there for 2 hours while the kids are just hot and nobody's leaving.
Right.
So the online system gave some kind of regularity and consistency to, okay, I know I'm going to get in. I've challenged them to come up with a different system that allows for some walk-ups. They do allow walk-ups. You just, if there's a spot left, then you do it on your phone and they'll even help you. So you're trying to balance a couple things of not having people show up and get really mad because they can't get in. And we've actually had people removed because their behavior's been so bad. Having the internal control of having cash accepted at that site. And then having, making sure that you can fill up as many spots as possible. So I think there are changes we could make. That's something we're discussing now internally. In terms of a second pool, it would be incredibly expensive because we'd have to meet all kinds of guidelines that this pool doesn't meet. Like a new pool, you actually have to be able to walk in. There has to be an ADA entrance on all new pools. It would also, to put one there, we'd have to go through a tremendous review process with New York State Parks, which is the underlying landowner from whom we lease it.
So yes, it would be a can of worms, is the answer to my question.
Big can of worms. And you've seen on the capital program, one of the things we're looking at too are splash pads, which we can do at a much lower cost in different sites. But I do think the pool can be optimized and the hours expanded, and we hope to talk to you more about that when we present Mark's budget.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is 16 West Main Street easement and offer of dedication. I believe Jennifer will present this.
Sure. So this is a project that the planning board approved last year. It's at 16 West Main Street for 62 units in a 4-story building. As part of that approval process, the applicant is offering to the city 2 easements. So there's 2 documents that you're considering tonight. One is an easement agreement and one is an offer of dedication. We'll talk about the easement first. Within the easement document, there are 2 areas of the site that the developer is offering an easement. One is at the very corner of West Main Street and Bank Street, and that the purpose of that easement is for a sight line provision to allow for that to remain clear and unobstructed so that motorists traveling along the roadway there have a clear sight line at that corner. And also to provide an easement for the city to install any utilities that it may need to install there in the future. So that's the easement document, the first part of the easement document. The second part is towards the rear of the property. As you are entering the property from Bank Street, the developer is proposing a water main that will be dedicated to the city once it's constructed and has met all of the city's requirements. So the second part of the easement is to provide the city with access over the private property in order to maintain and access that future water main. Moving on to the offer of dedication, this is kind of an odd situation. There's a little sliver of property, about 29 square feet, that's over the city sidewalk, that's currently owned by the private property owner. I have a feeling it dates back to urban renewal days as far as how this little sliver of property was retained by the private property owner and not in the hands of the city, considering it's within the city sidewalk. So the developer, as part of this project, has offered to kind of correct that situation and offer to dedicate to the city that 29 square foot sliver of property on the sidewalk of West Main Street. So those are the two documents that are before you. If they are acceptable to you, the next step would be at your next meeting for us to prepare a resolution for you to authorize signature on those documents.
Sorry, where is the offer of dedication exactly? Is that on that same map with the easement? I see the corner easement and the bit that's farther back. And then there was a bunch of letters that had stuff written about, 47 degrees, 26 minutes, and 43 seconds west, so I did not take the time to figure out exactly where that was, but I didn't know there was a visual that went with that.
If you're looking at the map, it's on the, let's see, directionally challenged here, I'll use, it's the right side of the property, right at the corner of the right side of the property along West Main Street. It's sort of a triangular shape.
Okay.
Over the city sidewalk. So it butts out from the main portion of the parcel, near that Half Moon area.
I see. So the developer would still be responsible for most of that sidewalk, as are all property owners, that wraps around from West Main Street to Bank Street. It's just that little bit down there that they would be dedicating to us.
Yeah, the property owner would still be responsible for sidewalks, as is every property owner that has property abutting a city sidewalk. It's really just to correct right now, this parcel, the shape of it is kind of, it has that little tail on it, I guess you could call it. Whereas it would, more logically make sense for that 29 square foot triangle that crosses over the sidewalk and actually even extends a little bit into the street, into the street right of way, to be owned by the city.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any further questions? And then we'll go on to the final item on the agenda, 44 Kent Street drainage easement. And again, Jennifer will help.
Sure. So this is another application that was recently approved by the planning board. It's for a 3-lot subdivision at 44 Kent Street. During the process of this application, during its review by the planning board, it was discovered that there's actually a pretty large culvert, city's culvert, that runs underneath these properties. But there's no existing easement agreement. So as part of the process, the property owner is offering to the city an actual recorded easement agreement to allow the city to continue to maintain that culvert underneath that property. The culvert is for the purposes of stormwater drainage.
Okay, any further questions? Then we'll go on to the final item on the agenda, 45 Kent Street drainage easement. And again, Jennifer will help.
Sure. So this is another application that was recently approved by the planning board. It's for a 3-lot subdivision at 44 Kent Street. During the process of this application, during its review by the planning board, it was discovered that there's actually a pretty large culvert, city's culvert, that runs underneath these properties. But there's no existing easement agreement. So as part of the process, the property owner is offering to the city an actual recorded easement agreement to allow the city to continue to maintain that culvert underneath that property. The culvert is for the purposes of stormwater drainage. as with the other document, if this is acceptable to you, the next step would be for us to prepare a resolution for your next meeting to authorize signature on the easement agreement.
Jennifer, I had a question about the map on this one. There's a reference to approximate underground piped stream. What is a piped stream?
That's the culvert. So
is this a former stream that-
conveys stormwater from one side of the property to the other underneath the ground, underground.
So it wasn't a former stream that's been put into a pipe?
That's my understanding, yes.
I believe this one emanates from Memorial Park. I don't know if after, before Memorial Park where it is, and I think it ends up in the creek. If it's the one I think it is, it ran under the building. That's the Melzinga tap room right now. And I know the pipe really well. Yeah, there's another one of these, just in case you wondered, under Rite Aid as well. So.
Okay, anyone else have anything?
And we have an executive session
Correct.
for litigation.
Okay. And we don't need a motion or anything like that, do we, to go into that?
I'm going to defer to Jen.
Yes, yeah, you'll need a motion to enter into executive session, and I'll mention Nick is going to be joining you for that executive session.
Okay, someone willing to make
And then
a-
Ren and Lee, you should have a link to join that. Okay, very good.
Motion to adjourn and go into executive session, or to go into executive session and then adjourn immediately after.
Second.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And then
Get
you
to vote.
Oh, vote, right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. Unanimous.
Aye.